How do we start this again? I've genuinely forgotten.
Well, I can't remember either. It's normally you that does it.
I think, yeah. Hang on, I'm going to bring up the actual Soundcloud and just listen to the first one, just very quickly, so I can remember.
This is the trouble with a big gap. I've just completely forgotten what we used to do.
Oh, hang on, someone's knocking at the door. This is rather frustrating. Right, 2 seconds. I'm trying to record a podcast. Pizza. Not really. You sure? Not 100% sure, but I'm mostly sure. I'm trying to record a podcast. David's on the other end of the line. Say hello if you like. Hi, David.
Hello.
You can't hear him because of the headphones. But Jordan's in the room now, and on the recording.
Oh. Hello,
I'm
Jordan.
definitely using this for the pre.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
That's definitely happening. Yeah, if you want a pizza, hit me up. I'm fucking dying. Jordan, what are your opinions on Kurdistan? You don't know who that is? No, Kurdistan's not a person, Jordan. It's a place.
I don't know what that is then.
Right, fantastic. Jordan is still wearing a dress, ladies and gentlemen, by the way. Just to broadcast that.
It's very fetching.
He woke up like this, quite literally.
Oh.
Bye, Jordan.
Bye.
Hello, I'm Chris Wright.
And I'm David Bryan.
Welcome to another episode of Revolutionary Despatches.
Finally.
It's the first one in some time.
Yes.
Yeah. Apologies for that. Basically what happened was, David ran away to Japan, and then everyone was very busy for a bit, and then I fell asleep.
Yes.
So, in summary, we're
Student life.
very sorry. Student life and all that.
Yes.
David, how was your little trip to the Far East?
Oh, it's very nice. I happened to get back the day before North Korea launched a missile over Japan, so that was good timing.
It was very good timing. Do you have any sense that perhaps Kim Jong-un knew you were there and was trying to take out such a threat to his authoritarian rule?
Yeah, I'd like to think so. But
Well,
they were rubbish at it.
Yeah. Well, of course they're rubbish at it.
Yeah. But
they're rubbish at everything apart from torture.
yeah.
Got that one down.
North Korea is bad. That's my analysis.
It's very solid analysis. I mean, unfortunately, it is the same analysis that is shared by the current American president. So, possibly some deeper complexities lie beneath.
Yes,
but,
I think the difference is that I think he's bad as well.
Yes. Yeah. Although I get the feeling that there is some self-hating in Trump's psyche.
Yes,
Very deep
actually.
down. Very deep down.
I suspect.
I mean, I'm increasingly coming to the opinion that the entire reason he ran for president in the first place was because of that roast that Barack Obama gave him at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Have you seen that video?
I have seen that video, yeah.
Like, the look in his eyes is quite terrifying. It's like, that is a moment. It's like a Bond villain. He's like, you shall be destroyed.
It's his origin story as a supervillain.
Yeah. When they come to make the film about his life.
Which there probably will be one day, which is a really depressing thought.
I mean, it depends who makes it. I have no objection to there being a film about his life. There are plenty of films about Hitler that are quite good. It's just how it's done.
It's the fact that anyone has to care about Donald Trump is just as an idea. That's a harbinger of the apocalypse.
True. I was watching an interview between James and Brian, and I believe it was Robert Webb. This one, he's been doing a few unfiltered series. I think I mentioned them to you.
Oh yeah.
But Robert Webb points out something which I hadn't quite thought of, but that it's The Apprentice is the same TV program has given us both Donald Trump and Katie Hopkins.
Oh yeah,
which is
I've never thought about it like that before. But yes,
as an institution.
Worth remembering that Donald Trump is a reality TV star before anything else.
Well, I mean, a real estate mogul before that even, but
well, the reason he's known.
Yes. Yeah, well, for anything other than just being a racist.
Yeah.
He was slightly known for being a racist beforehand because of the Central Park Five, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
He demanded their heads even after the point where everyone had decided they probably didn't do it.
Mm.
No, Donald Trump still wants them. I don't know how they do it in New York, lethally injected, presumably.
Do they actually have death penalty in New York?
I don't know.
Because they don't have it in all the states.
New York State.
Seems like New York would be one of the ones that didn't.
Yeah, but this was a while back, I suppose.
Oh, that's
it was polished in 2007, so it would have done then.
Ah.
But not anymore. Not anymore. Right, shall we
get on to the main stories for the week? Not that I think we have much idea what they are. So, let's have a quick recap of the chaos that's been occurring since we have been away, since it has been such a long time. We've had the
there's been a lot
party
of
conferences.
Yes,
and they were interesting. Did you? I don't think you went to the Labour one, did you?
I didn't know.
No,
I saw Corbyn's speech. It's surprisingly good, actually. I quite like Jeremy Corbyn, so perhaps I'm biased, but compared to like what I was expecting and previous speeches that I've seen of his, I thought it was really good.
I haven't seen it in full. I've seen bits and pieces, but it definitely looked better than the previous years,
and it definitely looked better than Theresa May's.
Oh, for goodness sake! Yeah. Well, I mean, could anything have been worse?
It was genuinely like something you'd see in a sitcom.
I mean, the thick of it would have done that.
Yeah. Yes, they definitely
absolutely would have done that. I mean, Inucci must be kicking himself that he didn't think of it. But it's life imitating art, imitating just some kind of bizarre hellscape. Really.
Yes, we are in the weirdest timeline at the moment.
I mean, it was the explanation given for how, like, the fact that she was coughing, so that they were all clapping to give her cover for that.
Yes.
And then that it was supposedly the fact that they were applauding so much was apparently the reason why the letters dislodged. because of course because in previous years at Tory conference they've had sort of big letters sort of painted onto the backboard, but then you ended up with Jeremy Hunt standing in front of the word country, which of course is not helpful.
That's just comedy gold.
It is. So I think for that reason they went for the slightly smaller ones, and they were magnetised, which is just asking for trouble.
Oh God! If she just like got a cough and the whole conference had rallied around her and applause and what have you, it could have been quite a touching moment. But because it was part of a series of really bizarre things that just happened,
it almost was quite touching to start with, but it went on for so long. I mean, I have a cough at the moment, so I may well need some applause from your end to cover that. Thank you very much. Thank you. That feels cheap now. It feels cheap. But, you could sympathise with that, but it just went on so long. It was one of those things. It's like, you applaud the stoicism of carrying on with it.
Yeah.
At some point, you do have to just bow out and just say, look, lads, I'll be back in half an hour.
That's not what you want from a Prime Minister giving their keynote speech to the party conference, is you admire their stoicism in struggling to the end of it.
Yeah.
It's quite a low bar for a good speech.
It really is, isn't it? You can't imagine Churchill. Mind you, Churchill probably would have just killed over drunk halfway through. So.
Yeah, very true. Man after my own heart.
And mine. Although less
only in that sense.
Yeah, I thought overall conference season went fairly well for the left.
Yes.
It wasn't a great victory for the other lot.
No.
There was an odd triumphalism about the Labour conference in the kind of, again, I wasn't there, so this is from a slightly distant view, but there does seem to be a sense in which quite a lot of people will sort of think there's going to be this one more heave. We just have to keep doing the same thing a bit longer and we'll be over the line. I don't know what
people are expecting Jeremy Corbyn to be the next Prime Minister now,
which is a new thing.
And to be fair, he's probably more likely than any other person I can think of.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the betting would be in that direction.
Yeah.
I mean, since the looking at the polls, because I'm obviously a massive nerd, so I have a little Excel spreadsheet with all the polls in, because the Wikipedia spreadsheet and graph are not up to my standards. So I have my own, which you will find in our shared folder, David, if you ever feel like perusing.
Oh, wonderful. I probably will, because I'm also a nerd.
Yes, but in any case, I think there was, after the Conservative and the Labour conferences, you can see somewhere around a 2-point drop in support for Conservatives over the next sort of couple of weeks. Interestingly, that started to recover. They've sort of regained about half of that support, and Labour stayed fairly flat.
So they didn't really give them a bounce.
No, there was a slight increase, but to be honest, it was only so small. It was probably just statistical noise. So
yes, when paying that close an attention to polls, it's very easy to read too much into just random fluctuations.
Well, I mean, I do use a 7-point moving average, so it's not like one poll's going to throw it all the way out. But even so, but yes, so it did seem to disadvantage them slightly, but not hugely.
No, but the Conservatives are already in quite a weak position. So,
True.
What they needed was a recovery, and they definitely didn't get that.
No, but at the moment on that 7-point rolling average, Labour are 2.1% ahead, which is enough of a swing, I think, to put them as the largest party, though not enough for a majority.
No. It's very difficult for any party to get a majority at the moment, particularly because of Scotland.
Yes, well, that's really the thing, isn't it?
I think people also forget just how bad the 2015 result was for Labour. So
it was catastrophic.
They have a huge amount of ground to make up before they can get anywhere near a majority again. They're on track, but it's
the 2017 result put them in a much better position.
Yes, they're now in a position where they probably could, without an unbelievable swing, be able to form a government. Because I think they had their biggest swing ever, or maybe since 1945.
I believe it's since 1945.
Yes, and it still didn't give them a government.
No.
So imagine the kind of swing that they would have to have had from 2015 to put them in government now.
Yes, although that's also partially affected by the fact that Tories also had a pretty good swing towards them.
To an extent, I think it was less than half the size of the Labour one, though.
Oh, yeah, much less. But
the Tories had a bit of a rise in poll numbers, mostly because of the collapse of UKIP.
Oh, yeah, well, almost entirely, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's where most of those votes came from.
But Labour managed once the election campaign took off, Labour were, with their enormous poll gains that were happening extremely fast, that was coming from everyone. They were taking votes off the Tories, UKIP, Lib Dems, I think the Greens and the SNP as well.
Oh, I definitely think that if the election campaign had run for another week with that level of coverage, we'd probably have a Labour largest party.
Yeah, certainly. And I can't see this government lasting a full term. And potentially they could, because British politics is in such a state that perhaps staggering on in this wounded state for an extended period of time is sort of the best that British politics can muster at the moment. But you wouldn't normally expect a government like this, especially one that's in so many ways seeming so tired and running out of talent, to be able to keep going for a normal length of term for a government. And if there's another election campaign, then it will come back to with campaign-style coverage, Labour make great gains in this current political climate. So I could see Labour very easily. I could easily see Labour winning an election at the moment, by quite a margin as well, actually, if they have a full campaign.
My only worry is, given that May hasn't gone yet, I think it's likely she'll cling on till after Brexit. Because I don't think any of the other big beasts in the Tory party want to be saddled with that. So I don't think they'll move against her. That's a very good point. Until she's, until after the, whatever it is, March 2019.
That's quite a significantly bad thing as well, because the Tories are going to make a mess of Brexit.
Yeah. So then the thing is, well, do they then have the election pretty soon after that? In which case, I think they're probably doomed. But if they can struggle on till 2022, maybe they can. I don't know. I mean, as you know, my economic predictions for post-Brexit are pretty dire. So that should work against them. But things are so volatile at the moment. I'm loath to get too hopeful. I think that's the problem.
It does seem like Labour would actually quite like to have a go at doing Brexit right. Whereas the Conservatives, it feels like, we've got to do this. We'll try and do it right, but we'd really rather not be doing this, is the feeling that I get from this Conservative government. Because Labour have had a bit of time in opposition, where they can think about what they want out of this, and sort of are the only people who seem like they might be able to deliver on some of the things that Brexit is supposed to be good for.
Well, I mean, the only real advantage to Brexit is it does loosen some of the strictures around, state aid to companies and things like that. I mean, other countries in the EU managed to get around it. I mean, France just ignores most of the rules. But yeah, so there is that end of things. I mean, I'd certainly be much happier for Labour to conduct Brexit than the Tories to. Although I'd prefer it if everyone just sort of quietly adopt it. I still think that might happen. I still think there's a decent chance that this transitional arrangement, which is slowly taking shape, might just last indefinitely, or at least for a long time.
I've come around a bit more to that view recently. I think Brexit might not happen actually, ultimately, because it's such a mess at the moment. No one really knows how any of this is going to work, and we're already how long have negotiations been going on now? Nearly a year.
Not quite a year.
Over 6 months, though.
Yeah.
And what has been achieved? Pretty much nothing.
And they have to be done by
less than 18 months' time.
This time next year,
yeah.
Because you've got to have time to get it through the European Parliament, through our Parliament, and then through the European Council, which for many member states requires then going back to their parliaments as well and getting them to approve it.
And then we've got the negotiations for a trade deal. because this is just the divorce bill settlement that they're negotiating over at the moment.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with having what the future relationship of Britain and the EU is going to be. We haven't even touched on that yet.
No,
at the moment, we're just negotiating how do we get out.
Well, that's why we need the transitional arrangement, because there's just not time otherwise.
Yes.
But yeah, as I say, it's how long that transitional period ends up being. And I think they might do a bit of a rolling renewal of it for some time to come.
That's a very good point. But it depends what the state of play is during the transition. Because we will have left the EU.
Yeah.
And the idea of the transition is that we stay part of the customs union and the common market and what have you.
Yeah.
So I do think that it's possible that I still think we're going to leave the EU. I doubt that they'll completely reverse on it. But you'll end up with a super, super soft Brexit by way of a transition, which never ends.
Yeah. With a kind of like a cliff edge hard Brexit always just around the corner. That's going to be the real problem, is we're going to have the worst of both worlds. We're going to have this
a sort of permanent crisis arrangement.
Yeah. The kind of soft Brexit that a lot of the pro-leavers don't want and will be massively annoyed by. But then with this constant threat of, well, if by some chance the transitional arrangement isn't renewed next year, suddenly we've fallen off the cliff.
If there's no other deal.
If there's no other deal, yeah.
Because what Labour want to do is use the transition to try and explicitly, the transitional period is supposed to be whilst we negotiate a membership of the single market, so that we can stay in it.
Yeah.
But they want some changes on the rules for free movement, because that's quite clearly part of the public opinion on Brexit. If you don't do something about immigration, but you leave the EU, you're sort of not really respecting the referendum result, and so you might as well stay in the EU. The question is, will the EU give us any of that? And the answer is, they'd be very reluctant to. The idea that you can be in the single market but not have free movement is sort of anathema to the EU.
It is, although I think there is possibly a deal to be had. I mean,
it is in the EEA treaties that you're allowed a certain amount of control over immigration. As in, it's just already in the standard deal for any EEA member. Most EEA members, like Norway and Iceland, for example, don't use it. In fact, they have less. Norway is in Schengen, so it has less restricted immigration than Britain does. But technically, they could, if they wanted to, leave Schengen, stay in the EEA, and then use the EEA rules to put controls on immigration. It's not much, but it is more control than in the EU. So that, plus some particular wrangling negotiations that you might be able to do with an EU, which seems like they would have an easier time negotiating with Labour, you could probably get something approaching a certain amount of control over immigration that would be enough to make people happy with it, but still being in the single market. I can see a path, if Labour's negotiating it, towards getting a reasonable settlement there. But that's not going to happen if the Tories are in power.
No, the thing is, it's massively in the interests of both the European Union and the United Kingdom to retain the economic partnership. I mean, if we pull out of the EU, our economy will go into recession, but so will some EU member states.
In my opinion, it's in our mutual interests for Britain to just stay a member of the EU. So.
Naturally, yes, of course. But I don't think, unless Vince Cable was Prime Minister in a year, which, to be honest, wouldn't surprise me that much at this point.
Given the ups and downs of politics recently, it's Donald Trump's the president. It's worth remembering that.
It is.
The idea that Vince Cable might be the Prime Minister is really not that strange compared to that.
Did you see that little video from the Lib Dem party conference?
Oh, no, I don't think so.
Oh, you must. It was on. They were playing it on Have I Got News For You the other day, but it's fantastic. He sort of puts his hat on, Vince, and then sort of winks at the camera. It's amazing. I'll find it for the show notes because people have to see it. It is mandatory viewing. It's one of the funniest things I've ever seen. It's only about 3 seconds long, so you have no excuse.
It's sort of knowing look.
Yeah.
I'm going to be the Prime Minister. Wink.
Vince.
I use a cable.
No, not Sir Cable, Sir Vince.
Sir Vince.
Don't do Sir Cable. It'll be Lord Cable. We haven't quite got there yet. Lord.
Is
Lord
that
Cable.
what it is? Yes, it is. I've always said it Sir last name, and I've always thought it sounds wrong.
Yeah, it does. You say if they're a knight, it's Sir first name, and then if they're a lord, it's Lord last name. Like Sir Alan, but Lord Sugar.
Right.
Anyway,
yes.
This is a semantic cul-de-sac, which is unbecoming of a left-wing podcast. Right. Shall we turn our attention overseas?
Yes.
Because
Okay.
there have been a couple of rather important developments in two would-be countries
Mm.
who have declared independence from the state of which they are currently a part. Now, most people will have heard of Catalonia,
Yes.
which, as you all should know, has recently voted to declare its independence from Spain. We also have a very similar process has been undergone in Iraqi Kurdistan,
Yes.
which has declared its independence from the central government of Iraq. So I wanted to turn perhaps to Catalonia first, because it is
Yep.
more well known.
I also know more about it.
Yes, there's that as well. The current state of play is that back in September, the Catalan Parliament passed two laws, the Referendum law and the Transition law, which were to give the Catalan government the right and ability to hold a referendum on Catalan independence from Spain. That referendum was then declared illegal by the Spanish Constitutional Court because it's against the Constitution of 1978, which doesn't permit regions of Spain to secede. It was then opposed by the Spanish central government under Prime Minister Rajoy, and I've mangled that, I'm sure.
Well, it's a J in Spain, so it's probably a H.
Yeah, Rajoy, yes, indeed. And then, obviously, the vote went ahead. There was police repression. The Spanish police were sent in. The Catalan Mossos were also ordered to act, but in many cases refused or did, the absolute minimum requirement. There was a great deal of civil mobilisation on both sides. There have been big protests in Barcelona just recently against the independence movement. But the end result of the referendum, of course, was that there was a fairly weighty result for independence, and on the basis of that vote, Catalan Prime Minister had previously declared independence and suspended it, but on Friday, the Catalan Parliament voted to unsuspend that declaration. And so Catalan has now unilaterally declared its independence, and Spain have responded by suspending the Statute of Autonomy. So now we're in this rather messy situation whereby the Catalonian government says it's an independent country, the Spanish government says you're now just a part of Spain, you have no autonomy whatsoever, and the European Commission is decidedly not getting involved, although they have agreed with the Spanish Constitutional Court that the referendum in the first place was illegal. But beyond that, there's been very little action from the EU.
I think it's worth remembering that if something's legal or not, that doesn't determine which side's right.
No, of course not.
For example, in early 1940s Europe, the Holocaust was legal and the French resistance was illegal.
I don't know what specifically your position on the independence argument is. I suspect I can guess, but maybe you'd like to lay that out.
So, it's an odd one in that it doesn't cut precisely across left-right divides.
No.
There are right-wing people who support Catalan independence as a sort of anti-EU thing, and left-wing people that do so, and right and left-wing people who do the opposite, support Spanish union. I certainly think that the Spanish government has behaved unacceptably, particularly around the referendum itself. They should have allowed there to be a referendum and to respect the results of it as well. I know it's against their constitution, but that means their constitution's wrong.
And frankly, there is no, like, when we have the Scottish independence referendum in this country, I mean, there's no constitutional right for Scotland to secede from the Union, but the central government has the sovereignty and allowed that to occur, which is, the Spanish could have done the same.
Yes. So given that, we're a bit past the point of no return. If the Spanish government gets what it wants now, then that means that the violence that it's used has worked. I don't want that to be the outcome. So I think overall, I would probably support Catalan independence. And I certainly would support their right to declare it if they want to. I wouldn't push for it if it wasn't being called for, but self-determination is the most important thing here.
There is an argument which I've seen made, which runs along the lines that one of the main drivers for the push for Catalonian independence is the fact that Catalan is one of the richest, I think, other than the Basque country, I think it's the richest region of Spain. Spain in inverted commas for both of those. And that they are upset at the revenue which is generated in Catalonia going to support other regions of Spain, largely Andalusia, which is, of course, much poorer, which is the southern region,
yes,
for those who are not up to date on their Spanish geography.
Yes, so it's an interesting thing whereby that would be the sort of thing that would lead conservative parties, centre-right parties, to want independence.
Yes.
But it's also tied up with the Spanish Civil War a while ago, and the dictatorship that they had, in that Catalonia was treated extremely badly under Franco.
I mean, their language was declared illegal.
Yes.
or not even to be a language.
And the new Catalonia would be a republic, which is a much more left-right issue in Spain. The left in Spain is much more anti-monarchy than it is here, because they were a republic for a while. And they even have a different flag, and you always see it on protests and so forth.
Very good flag.
It is a very good flag, actually.
One of my favourite flags.
But the Catalan Independence movement and the government in the Catalan Parliament at the moment is a coalition of all different parties, which seem to me to span pretty much the usual spectrum of the parties of a European Parliament. They go from centre-right, centre-left, they have Liberals in there, they have Greens in there. But there are also groups outside of that coalition who also have seats on the Catalan Parliament and also support independence. And they tend to be quite radical left movements. But there is a history of Catalonian leftism being more anarchist than other European radical left movements.
Which again is a result of the Spanish Civil War, and before that, I think of the kind of the particular concentration of industrialization in that region as compared to the rest of Spain.
And you've got to remember that only happened in the 30s, so that's within living memory, when several million people in Catalonia lived in an anarchist society for a period of years. In the middle of a civil war, so it wasn't the most...
And with the Soviets doing their best to help the fascists crush it out of existence.
Yes, it's one of the few cases where fascists, Stalinists, and liberal capitalists all united against a common enemy, which was the anarchists. And I think there is a strain of that still happening in the Catalonian independence movement. But there's also a much more centrist aspect to this as well, which includes some quite conservative people.
I mean, my position is roughly the same as yours. I mean, certainly self-determination I think is important. I've seen some people argue that actually the Catalonian right to self-determination doesn't exist because they've been part of Spain for so long and all this kind of thing. I don't buy
They've
that
been part
argument.
of Spain for a long time, but Spain, for a lot of that, Spain wasn't a democracy.
No, and well, for most of it, and they were only united after all by the union of the crowns of Isabella and Ferdinand.
Yes, and the Spanish state, especially the Spanish deep state, still has a lot of the old fascist regime in it, and including their Conservative Party. It's not like, for example, that was always a worry with Podemos, which was never a case with Syriza. That when Syriza got into power, there was no worry that there was going to be a military coup or something against them, whereas that could very easily have happened if Podemos had won the election. So when Syriza came to power in Greece, there was never a worry that there was going to be like a military coup or something, that the Greek deep state would move against them. Whereas that was a worry with Spain and Podemos. If Podemos had won the election, there very easily could have been the Spanish military, for example, trying to depose the government. They never had that step change. It was a more... The way they transitioned into being a democracy was perhaps smoother than you'd like it to be when you're transitioning out of fascism.
I mean, it was the king, wasn't it?
Yes.
Who had been left all the power by Franco. Magnanimously decided to return power to the people.
So, the idea that there's some force that wants to majorly change the structure of the Spanish state, i.e. to make part of the area that is now Spain governed by a completely different state, that seems to me to be, to at least an extent, moving to correct that hangover in Spanish politics, especially if you're trying to make it a republic as well.
I mean, on the specifics of the actual referendum, there are problems with low turnout. This is, I think, the crucial from the argument as to whether the referendum is legitimate. It was over a 90% vote for independence, but it was only on a 43% turnout because of largely, I think, the difficulty most people had in voting because of the police action against people trying to cast their vote.
Well, that's sort of the point of the police action. They always knew that they would never be able to stop everyone from voting. All they needed to do was disrupt it enough to cast doubt on the referendum result.
Yeah. So I think it is. I think it is legitimate that the Catalan Parliament have gone ahead with their Declaration of Independence.
Yes, and even if the turnout was higher, given the extent of the vote for independence in the people that did vote, that would still be a large... you would have to have the people that didn't vote but might have vote against independence so overwhelmingly that it would be very unlikely that if they were to hold a proper referendum, it would be anything other than independence.
So it will be interesting to see what happens in the next few days and weeks. I mean, the Catalan president will mangle his name. Puigdemont, I think, is maybe how that's pronounced, but who knows. He has left the country, I believe. I think he's been offered asylum by the Belgians because
Interesting.
Part of the Belgian coalition government at the moment is one of the Flemish nationalist parties, who obviously want Flanders to secede from Belgium. So
That's
they
interesting.
have sympathies with the Catalonian. That is a far more fraught, kind of on a left-right axis, that particular independence movement. But in any case,
Is it? In which direction?
Well, the Flemish nationalists lean to the right.
Do they, right?
In a way which the Catalonians have kind of a bit of both, but I think overall lean left.
Right.
Flanders is obviously is sort of the
Much richer
part of Belgium. Actually, the Walloons, the French speakers, are also want to succeed. It's quite it's one of those things. It's almost at the point where it probably would be better if the two just went their separate ways. But since there's such large nationalist movements in both halves, it almost seems daft not to. But anyway.
But essentially, Belgium was carve a bit off of the Netherlands, carve a bit off of France, make a new country so no one can control the whole Netherlands.
Which is the Spanish fault again. It all comes back to
that branch of the Habsburgs.
But yes, so anyway, that particular minister, for those reasons, has offered Puigdemont asylum, and any other members of the Catalan leadership who have been sort of charged with sedition under by the Spanish courts, which carries up to a 30-year prison sentence if convicted.
Right. I think the SNP and Plaid Cymru have both come out saying they haven't exactly officially recognised Catalonia, but they've offered explicit support for them in some way.
Well, yeah, I mean, Plaid Cymru aren't in government, but I suppose the SNP could probably offer asylum.
Yeah, that's true actually.
In Scotland, that would cause problems with the central British government who have supported Spain, but Nicola Sturgeon's never shown much hesitance to annoy Theresa May, so I'm sure that she's probably up for it. If
Got to remember that she is Scottish.
Shall we turn then to Kurdistan?
The other one, yes.
The other one, yeah, I'm sure that's how they love to be thought of. So yeah, it's a kind of a very interesting parallel.
Yes.
So the referendum was held on the 25th of September, and 93% approximately in favour of independence. So the referendum was sort of set up to be non-binding, but since then the Kurdistan regional government have kind of, how would you put it, acted as if it has been de facto a binding referendum.
Was because they are also right in between they're right next to the Syrian civil war.
Yes.
Previously, ISIS had been very powerful in northern Iraq as well.
Yes. Well, this is the thing. So you've had calls for Kurdish independence for a long time. They're the largest national group in the world without a state of their own. They spread over Syria, Iraq, Turkey, and Iran primarily. They have been kind of leading the fight really against Daesh in northern Iraq and in northern Syria as well. The Syrian Kurds. So
yes.
The Peshmerga forces, which is their kind of regional army, are battle-hardened veterans, which is may cause some problems for the Iraqi government, because essentially the Iraqi government has not recognised the
new Kurdish state.
The new Kurdish state, yes. So they've sent troops to the border crossings to secure those. They've stopped all international flights over the region, these kinds of things, and they. Crucially, the Kurdish claim extends outside the official Kurdistan region.
Yes.
That's one of the key problems. So the area which is held to be part of historical Kurdistan includes territory which is not under the Kurdistan government's control.
Including primarily the city of Kirkuk, I think it's called?
Kirkuk, yes. So that's one of the big problems, because it's a very, very important city economically, because it's very rich in oil.
Yes.
And oil production facilities. And so control of that city is really vital to an independent Kurdistan being economically viable. And the Peshmerga had been kind of crucial in liberating it from Daesh, who had previously held it, but now the Iraqis have moved in and recaptured it from the Kurds, which has begun a military conflict along the new border. And obviously the Iraqi army is much larger, but the Peshmerga are, I think most people would agree, much better trained and more experienced.
Well, the trouble is, for America, is that these are both American allies in the conflict in the region. So they're put in quite a difficult position for what position to take.
But yeah, so the problem in the international, kind of in the sense within the region, is that the Turks are worried because the areas of Turkish Kurdistan that border Iraqi Kurdistan, now the independent.
And a very large part of Kurdistan is in Turkey.
Yes. I think possibly the majority, or at least the plurality of the population.
Certainly the plurality, yeah.
Yeah. So, and those areas of Kurdistan have previously been in a kind of what the Turkish government would characterise as a terrorist campaign against the Turkish state.
There's a very interesting faction to that that's considered a terrorist organisation by the Turkish government called the Kurdistan Workers' Party.
Yeah.
Who are anarchists and are very much involved in the Syrian civil war as well. Syrian Kurdistan, insofar as some of it's independent, quite a lot of it is currently anarchist controlled.
Whereas the Iraqi areas are less so.
No, that's more of a parliamentary system because they have had a semi-autonomous parliament for a while. It's one of the better things to come out of the Iraq War is that the Kurds got more independence.
But you have so you have those regional tensions between the Syrian Kurds and the Iraqi Kurds, who have very different systems of government, very different political beliefs, but obviously have a common national cause and feel very keenly that they are the same people. You have the Turkish Kurds who have previously been led by the Kurdistan Workers' Party, but also other political groups, pushing for independence, both with parliamentary means, but also through force. And the whole region is, of course, a bit of a powder keg at the best of times, and these aren't the best of times.
Yes.
So
this shows that I think this is a theme that we're going to see more of in the region, which is that now that Daesh are falling back, the coalitions of the unlikely friends who were finding themselves on the same side against ISIS, their underlying tensions will start to come out more. So the reason why the Kurds and the Iraqi government had managed to maintain this kind of uneasy peace for so long is because they were both busy fighting ISIS. Now that threat's waning, they're starting to go at each other. It would be interesting to see if, for example, America has been fighting alongside Russia quite a lot in Syria. But to an extent, it was always very complicated because their attitudes towards the regime was very different. But they were both fighting ISIS. That's likely to become more tense now that they don't have that common enemy.
Well, now the common enemy is being pushed back.
Yes. Yeah, of course, ISIS is still there, and it's very much a real thing. It's weaker than it was by a long way.
Yeah. Well, it's lost cities like Mosul and Kirkuk, which are kind of key to its economy. As you say, the real, I think one of the real issues is the kind of the Iranian, Syrian, Iraqi government axis may now be joined by the Turks, who don't get on with Iran, Syria, Iraq necessarily, but they have a common interest in preventing Kurdish independence.
Yes.
Because they are worried that it will spread to the territory they control, and that is such a significant part of Turkey territorially and population-wise. It would be quite a blow to them economically to lose it, and also a real blow to Erdogan's personal prestige.
Yes.
Given his obsession with appearing like this kind of authoritarian, semi-dictatorial, well, moving into properly dictatorial really at this point, kind of a Putin-esque figure. It would really damage his image within the country and also wider in his relations with people like Putin and Trump, both of whom he has sort of been reasonably friendly towards, given...
He appears to be, at least to an extent, in that mould of politician.
Yes, and I don't think he could take a blow of that nature. So I think...
No, and so he's backed into a corner.
He would be, but he would be willing to use, I think, force to make sure. I mean, there are troops deployed in Turkish Kurdistan as we speak. In any case,
from his perspective, he wouldn't really have much other options.
No, which is a real worry. I mean, the Kurdistan independence issue to me is more clear cut even than the Catalonian. I think it's pretty obvious, given the repression which the Kurds have faced over the decades, and really,
ultimately, it's ours and the French's fault with the way that we carved up the
Sykes-Picot. I mean, Iraq and Syria aren't really countries; they're loose agglomerations of groups. The borders just cut across national and tribal lines and religious lines as well, with no real kind of consideration for the people actually living there.
That was always the problem with Iraq. That's partly why ISIS came about in the first place, is that the Sunnis in Iraq were being hard done by the new Shia government that had come about after the war. Yeah. Back when they were still ISI, they didn't add the extra S for Syria. That's kind of where ISIS came from.
Another situation which will play itself out in the coming weeks. I mean, it is to be hoped that the Kurds can retain their independence. It is the Kirkuk issue is a bit more fraught because there's quite a large Arabic population there as well as Kurdish.
Yes, it's historically considered to be part of Kurdistan, but it isn't terribly Kurdish at the moment.
But it is rather vital economically to the success of any.
Yes, it's a big oil city.
Kurdish thing. So, yeah, it is to be hoped it doesn't escalate into a full war. But
yes, Iraq does rather a well-known line in civil wars.
Yeah,
they don't tend to end well.
No, or end really. at all. On that slightly somber note, shall we turn our attention back to home shores?
Yes.
Because I think the sort of the last thing we really want to talk about this week is the recent election for the leadership of everyone's favourite right-wing nationalist organisation, the United Kingdom Independence Party. Oh yes.
Yes.
Oh yes. So they
That's been fun.
they are sans farage, as indeed his French name would require it be put.
Sans forage.
Sans Forage, yes. Sans Forage. They have lost... I mean, what was her name? I can't even remember her name. Diane James. She stepped down after 17 days. They then had Paul Nuttall for a bit, and now Paul Nuttall's out. So they're turning over the leaders fairly rapid clip. I think even the Liberal Democrats are probably looking on with a bit of disdain at this point, which is saying something.
Yeah, you know you're in trouble when the Lib Dems are looking down on you.
You do. So the new leader, elected on the 29th of September, is a chap called Henry Bolton.
Yeah, I could not remember his name.
It's understandable because he's a bit of a non-entity. In terms of his qualifications, he's actually probably one of the better qualified people in the party. He's ex-army, which for UKIP is pretty good, I suppose. He was a police officer, and he worked in, I think it was Afghanistan. Yeah, he was worked for the Foreign Office, and he was seconded to Afghanistan, and he worked on border management strategies. So he's you can understand why UKIP would go for him. I think he's got the military and the police experience, which would appeal, I think, to the kind of conservative mindset. He's also, given that he worked for the Foreign Office for a number of years, he's obviously no idiot, which
always a plus.
Improvement on the previous, I think. So
Far right parties always struggle with that.
They do. It's I'm never sure why that is, but they do seem to attract some. So they've got a new leader. They've changed the logo, and they've got a rather swish purple lion to replace the rather dated-looking pound.
Do you know, I did not know they'd changed their logo either.
Yeah.
It certainly worked as a rebrand, doesn't it?
It's not massively broken into the public conscience, but then I don't think you're their key demographic, David.
That's true. That is true.
Unreconstructed leftists are not necessarily fertile hunting ground for...
Incorrigibly unreconstructed.
Incorrigibly unreconstructed, yeah, indeed. So, yeah, new leader, new logo, brand spanking new.
Look at all the good it's done them.
Well, we can return to my polling and
Yes.
reveal that since Mr. Bolton was elected, the moving average has risen for UKIP by a total of...
A grand total
of 0.2%. So a rebounding resurgence there. Really quite something. Obviously, Henry Bolton has energised the party no end. We haven't just come here to mock, although primarily I think that's on the table.
You've got to remember that right-wing parties basically don't have any activists, and they never do, because no one wants to put the hours in. Well, their advantage is that they have lots of money. I'm
not going to lie to you, David. I'm afraid that I think we both have it in common that both of our hometowns are very, very pro-UK.
Yeah.
Are you from Thanet?
No, Clacton.
Clacton, that's
the one that had
yes
the MP.
Master Carswell.
Yes. Yeah, here we are. UKIP's got about 32,000 members and declining, whereas Labour has got 570,000 members
and rising. I think.
And rising, yes.
Well, I'm newly added to that total, David. As
yes.
I've finally taken the plunge and joined you.
Indeedy. Good to have you on board.
Leftistness.
Yes. And our being members of the primary centre-left party in a northwest European liberal capitalist democracy. Super left-wing.
You've got to start somewhere, David.
You have got to start somewhere, yes.
You've got to start somewhere. You can't go from a standing start to bringing out the guillotine.
No.
There's got to be...
No, you've got to work up to the guillotine. Yes.
You have. The deputy chairman of the UKIP is, interestingly, the Earl of Dartmouth, so, real insurgency there. Sorry, one of the deputy chair people, I should say. The other deputy chairperson is Suzanne Evans.
But this is my point, is that...
I can't stand Suzanne Evans.
Is that while you might think that it's possible to have a grassroots movement for all manner of things, it tends to be that only really left-wing causes can ever do a proper grassroots movement.
Yeah.
There are a few exceptions, but broadly speaking, you can't really do a bottom-up right-wing thing. There's always in some
quite-
like every fascist dictatorship was always supported by the existing elites.
Yeah, well, they didn't get into power until they were.
Mhm.
They started being sort of based in like the lower middle class, and then they get taken over by the elites when they reckon actually we'd rather have them than the socialists.
The idea that there is this thing that's anti-establishment right-wingness. There are people who try to do it, but it's there's never any there in the same way that there is for left-wing movements. Sometimes left-wing movements without support from the elites do succeed, because it's sort of the only thing which ever manages to escape the reproduction of essentially the same system, in my opinion.
Anyway, the reason we wanted to talk about this particular election is not just to take the piss out of Henry Bolton, although, you know, I've enjoyed it. But the more crucially, I think, for politics going, I hate that phrase going forward, but
Going forward,
coming up now is the person he stood against. So
yes,
there was a pretty broad field initially in the UKIP election, but the final kind of contest came down to really a two-horse race
in essence.
between Henry Bolton and Anne-Marie Waters. Now, Anne-Marie Waters is Irish. She's very, very, very far right.
Yes.
She's to the point where people like Farage were saying that if she wins, then the party's finished. And he's not exactly known as a bastion of liberalism.
No. No, this was genuine far-right stuff. UKIP has never properly been the same as other European far-right parties. But under her leadership, it would very much have been more in the mould of other European far-right parties.
Yeah, it tends to attract that voting base since the collapse of the BNP.
Certainly,
where
yeah.
the actual membership tend to be kind of furthest end of the Tories going on, you know, slightly to the left of fascism. But I think if Anne-Marie Waters had won, we would be seeing the emergence of a new, properly fascist party. And indeed, having lost the election, she set up her own party called For Britain, which the logo of which is a trident, which is half purple and half red. So
I'm just going to look at that.
it's quite good. It's not quite, you know, red and black, which, as we know, is the best colour scheme for all anarchist and fascist movements. For some reason, they like the same colours. We've never understood. But it's.
I see. Yes.
So she set this up. She's affiliated, I think, with Tommy Robinson.
Yes.
AKA Stephen Yellenin, who is the former leader of the English Defence League. There's a few other people involved from within the kind of general British far right scene. There's a good article posted on the Hope Not Hate website recently, kind of detailing in more detail who she is and who the other members of her new organisation are. So I shall link to that in the show notes because it can probably do a better job than I can. But yeah, I really just wanted to bring this up because the fact that she was able to get so far in the internal leadership battle, frankly, is quite worrying. She is avowedly anti-Islam, pretty straight up and down racist, to the point where Farage has called her a Nazi, which is not a term he throws around very often. So I think we can be fairly pleased that she didn't win, but I think it's also worrying that she was able to get as far as she did.
Yes. I think to an extent it's just because UKIP became a thing and then collapsed. And so there was this shell of a party that was recently relevant, but which had fallen apart enough that it was small enough that relatively fringe groups could have a shot at taking it over.
Yeah.
So there was a sort of a perfect storm situation whereby groups that usually don't get a word in edgeways had a platform which was to an extent significant, but which they could also have a shot at controlling. And I don't know that will come back.
Yeah, I mean, in fairness, the actual turnout was pretty low in the election, so she actually only received 2,755 votes. So we're not talking about a huge caucus, but still.
No. And we can't know what would have happened to UKIP if she'd won. It's entirely possible that the voters who have been clinging on to UKIP would turn away. And because UKIP has always been quite focused around the personality of Nigel Farage, if he really doesn't like her and comes out very explicitly against her, then sort of hardcore old-fashioned UKIP people who've been there for ages, I could see them moving away.
Yeah, that's definitely true. But yeah, something to keep an eye on, I think.
Certainly, yeah.
I don't suspect For Britain will get anywhere electorally.
Oh, no, they never do.
The BNP having collapsed and Britain First being on the wane, it's possible they'll become sort of the new rallying banner for the kind of the fascist street movements, which have taken a bit of a hammering since the EDL went down in flames.
Yes.
To my eternal joy.
This is the thing, that those groups, those sorts of groups, never end up running away with themselves with their own momentum, like leftist groups sometimes can.
Momentum, very good.
Yeah. The only reason why far-right groups like that ever get beyond 1% in the polls and no influence is if they start to get the support of elites somehow.
Yes, you're quite right. You are quite right. And I don't think the Earl of Dartmouth is particularly likely to
No.
throw Anne-Marie Waters into the new group. I would have linked to their For Britain manifesto in the show notes, but unfortunately it goes to a dead page.
Oh.
So I shall not do that.
Yes, I think we're quite safe from this party.
Oh, what is the sign-off? Genuinely can't remember.
You've been listening to Revolutionary Dispatches.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you,
right.
comrades,
Yeah,
for your time and
Okay.
attention.
indeed. This can probably go at the end in a bit.
Give the resolution.
Indeed. Right, let's go. You've been listening to Revolutionary Dispatches. Thank you, comrades, for your time and attention. Viva la Revolution.
Why grind through trials with ease? No choice that I regret.
Do we intend to be back next week, David?
Yeah, I think so. We might as well.
Same time, same place?
Same time, same place.
I'll try and be awake. You'll try and not be in Japan. It'll all be
I will try.
bloody
It's very
brilliant.
difficult.
You do seem to just get whisked away to these places.
Yes, yeah.
You had about, what, 3 days notice?
Yeah.
And then you're in Japan.
Yep.
How does that work?
It was slightly bizarre to live through it.
I need to plan, like, a trip to Sainsbury's a week in advance.
But it was mostly someone else had planned it, mostly. And so they then said, do you want to come? I was like, oh, okay.